It's hard, man. Betting is tough. Picking fights is not easy.
Right. And there's some fights that I'll go through. I'm like, I'm picking this, but this is not one that I'm betting on. But we just did some parlays, so maybe talk about those at the end. But first fight, we'll go to the early prelims. This one, I think, would have been more interesting a few years ago. But
Mm.
I Phil Hawes, I think he's a veteran. He's the underdog in this, but not by much. But 12-4. I think he's had some impressive wins earlier in his career, but he's getting older. He did not do well against Delize. And I was watching the Delize fight, and I'm pretty sure he like tore his ACL or did
Yeah,
something.
he blew out his leg. So like that's why the fight's
Mhm.
hard to extrapolate much from, is because
Mhm.
he was really compromised. But I mean, again, he got put out bad.
Yeah.
So
When Delize he was on the rise. I mean, he had
mhm.
a tough loss against Vittori, but he's on the incline. Whereas you see a guy like Haas turn at 34. Not never say never, but usually if we're looking at the statistics, not many people are Glover Teixeira. Um,
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mean, it's the classic. Somebody's on the downtrend of their career, and a guy
mhm,
like Ikram Aliskerov is coming up, and
mhm.
dude, he's got what, four finishes in his last five fights, something like that, and
Yeah,
it's pretty telling when the UFC is positioning somebody to
yeah.
to succeed. And as much as I
It's
like Phil Hawes, his name lives up to it. No hype. I mean, this guy is really, like you said, in the last 3 years, just in a tough spot.
mhm. Well, that's what happens. I mean, you want to be the best, you have to eventually fight the best. And then,
Yeah.
you'll see on these early prelims, it's the guys on the rise, and then it's the guys like, this is it, bro. This is it's like the next fight we can talk about with Parker Porter and Braxton Miller, I believe. But also strength of schedule, I think that plays a big part, even though they may not be on the winning track, or like, I think just experience makes a big difference. Because you'll go and you'll look, you'll be like, oh, they're 15-0, but who have they really fought? So
Mhm.
I always look at like who they fought in the UFC, because that's what I compare to. That's not everything. Doesn't mean everything, but it's definitely an easier frame of reference than like if they're fighting in a Russian fight league and tracking all of those different leagues of people trying.
Well, yeah, and for a guy like Ikram, you say, okay, who is he lost to? The only loss he has is to Hamzat Chimaev, which
Yep.
is obviously no shame in
No.
that setback. And an organization like Brave CF, they do a really good job of matchmaking. When you go through Ikram's tapology, his opponents, they're not cans. I mean, they're guys who are 11-3, 12-3,
Hmm.
3-0, 4-0, 9-4. He was evenly matched throughout the come up of his career. So you bring up a good question, right? Are they beating cans on the regional scene and then they come
Yeah.
in and get nuked in the UFC? I don't think that that's the case. I think this guy's had a tough
Hmm.
strength of schedule. Guys like Dennis Tululian have gone on to the UFC, and obviously
Yep.
Chimaev. So I'm pretty confident on Aliskerov here, but at -198 favorite, Adam, I feel like we can find some more juice.
Yeah. Um, One question is the fight league that he came from, because when I watched, he had one fight on Fight Pass, and then like
Mhm.
I YouTubed him a little bit. Um, is that league exclusively a Russian fighting league that he was fighting in?
I'm not sure where Brave is housed. I think it's more the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia.
Okay, yeah,
But they're on Fight TV, which is another big, streaming service. And he had an Eagle FC
yeah.
performance.
And then one thing for people watching this, if you want to go look and research all the fights, like I like Tapology more than I like Sherdog. Sherdog kind of loads slow and
Yeah.
it's a bunch more pop-ups, but Tapology is a lot more and kind of inaccurate. Like, see, like, why do they not have this guy's reach correct, or like something? Just a lot of that Tapology, not so much. And they give like, I think they give the DraftKings odds, or one of the odds. The odds are different at all the books, and the odds are subject to change from when I made this till when the fight starts. So this is early in the morning, but yeah. See here, that's what I noticed with Hawes. He was more of a knockout guy, uh, but again, that was earlier on. I think he's declining quite a bit, and
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Ikram,
his. his one finish since January of
Mhm.
2021 is Deron Wynn, who should not be fighting at middleweight, and it took Phil Hawes way too long to finish him, all things considered.
Sure.
So it's like, yeah.
Yeah. So if we move on to the picks, here's my pick. I got Ikram submission first round. I think he's got a well-rounded fight game. He's going to use that stand-up to open up the ground game. And never bet against the Russian neckbeards, dude, unless they're fighting against each other, which is the one time he lost when all bets are off. Because you ever seen that picture of Khabib in the bathtub with like his
Yeah.
Sambo teammates? It's like, oh, they all kind of look the same from that place. The guys with the neckbeards just never seem to lose to me. Uh, I would put their records up against any other groups of people. But um, you you're with that pick. I think most of the people are. That one's like kind
I
of
think
it's one of my locks.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to go all the way on submission round one. I think that's like plus
Mm,
550 or something. But I think a safe bet would be Ikram Aliskerov inside the distance, which is minus 105. So that hedges it. That's if he gets a knockout, if he gets a sub. In his career, he's
sure.
gotten 4 KO wins, 5 submissions, right? So it's like
Yeah.
I don't want to pick one and then be wrong. I'd rather just cover the bases. And at minus 105,
Yeah.
that's still really good odds. That's basically doubling the money.
Yep. So yeah, you don't have to bet on that, but if you do want to try and make more money, uh, I'm going submission for the
Yeah.
win.
Adam's
But
going crazy. Adam's picking, he's swinging big.
well, these aren't the ones I necessarily put my money on, but if I was to, I put them on some other things. But I will go with submission. Um, next fight, this one really interested me a lot. I think it's a very exciting fight. Braxton Smith and Parker Porter. Um,
Mhm.
you got Braxton Smith, who he had one fight against like Chris Daukaus back in I want to say like 2014, and then just didn't fight until I think maybe 2020. 2020, like
Are you talking about Parker Porter?
Braxton Smith.
Braxton, he fought Chase Sherman in 2014 and then came back in 2022. So yeah, a weird, 8-year layoff. But since
Yeah,
then, he just was nuking guys.
like bad, like
Yeah.
that's why I like to watch the fights, because you can't see it all on paper. I mean, you can see that got these knockouts, but you're like, okay. When you just look at a guy hasn't fought in the UFC against a guy like Parker Porter, who's a very respectable, I'd say almost journeyman type of guy. A lot of the
Yeah.
heavyweights seem to be journeyman type guys.
There's a
Where
lot of litmus tests. Parker Porter represents somebody that's much akin to a gatekeeper. You get by Porter, you're ready for a bigger step into the heavyweight division. And I
right,
think that's represented in the last 4 years of his matchmaking. Guys like
yeah,
Chris Daukaus who beat him and then go on to main event. Guys like Jourdain Almeida who beat him and then go on to main event. Guys like Justin Tafa who, recently dispatched him in February of this year and then went on to get a big opportunity. And that
yeah,
fight against Muhammad Usman wasn't great, but again, it represents that if you beat Porter, you are pretty much primed for a larger spotlight at 265, which,
yep. That's why it's probably headlining the early prelims. It's like the
yeah.
um, Braxton Smith, like what impressed me so much. I think his last fight against Ja'Cory Savage, that guy was like 6'7", if I'm not mistaken. So like the reach and the height advantage was crazy because he's only 5'11", and it doesn't even have his reach listed on Tapology or
Yeah.
UFC.com anywhere that like would be like a mainstream source to find it. Um, and so, but he's been knocking people out, and I compare it to the last fight with Parker Porter when he fought Justin Tafa, who's also a guy with heavy knockout power. Did that to him, and I think this guy's 38 years old. The age difference also makes a difference. I think when you haven't had that many fights, because this guy's only had 6 fights, professional MMA fights. Parker Porter's been in this thing for a minute. And he's again one of those guys that's like this. But I think, yeah, gatekeeper. I was surprised. So I'll go and before I even look at the lines, I pick my winners before that, and I picked Braxton Smith like 80% confidence level in Braxton Smith. But Parker Porter's key to winning would be to get out of the first round. which is kind of the case with most knockout people, even like at the lower weights, like McGregor. It's like once you got out of the first round with him, your chances of winning increased significantly after that. But I don't know. Do we know anything about Braxton's ground game, or is he just pounded dudes and just?
That's the big difference between the last fight between Hawes and Aliskerov and this one is I just don't think Braxton Smith has been really tested
Yeah.
Against some
Yeah.
serious competition. Not to disrespect Peak Fighting Championship in any way, shape, or form, or B2. Like those are respected regional scenes, but again, regional scenes. Parker Porter has some, decent wins. You beat Chase Sherman in 2021. Again, Sherman's the guy who beat Braxton Smith way back in the day. Josh Parisi and Alan Baudot. These are decent wins, and Parker Porter has never lost a decision. 5-0 when it's gone to the scorecard. So he can find ways to extend himself past not only the first round, but the second and third. So when you're facing these guys who have success on either the Contender Series or they're brought in for their UFC debuts and there's just not much known about them, fading them is typically the advised action. And you can see that that's represented in Porter's money line, which is -180. He is favorite. That's a decently sized favorite to win. But like we talked about, Porter at 38 is a little bit older, and the age range at heavyweight's different than the age range at other weight classes, but 38, that is still old, and he's been finished 7 times, 4 of those by KOs. He's coming off back-to-back first-round stoppage losses. So for me, it's like I look at where Braxton Smith excels, and I look at where Parker Porter is weak at current. And Braxton Smith round 1 KO plus 300. I think that's going to be where my head's at.
Yeah, I spelled his name wrong. I don't know who I know that's named Braxton Miller, but I kept wanting to call him that. I had to put the odds in here when I was making this through Cesar Sportsbook because for some reason, FanDuel didn't have this bet available for a while. And the last time I saw it available, it was like plus 220. I want to say like plus 220, plus 250 for Smith, something like that. I was like, oh, that looks like I want that deal.
Yeah.
Because I think even though he's the underdog on the line, he's the favorite in my mind, just based off of what I've seen, and what we typically see with guys like a Porter aging out. So my pick, I think we're on the same page. Braxton Miller, KO, TKO, round 1. I think similar to the Tafa result for Porter, losing early because he's going to come out swinging.
It's gonna, and like that's the thing. I think you could definitely hedge with betting on Parker Porter. I don't know what the line is inside the distance, but I think a smart way to play this heavyweight matchup would be either getting the round 1 at Braxton Smith and then also putting a smaller play on Parker Porter because we haven't seen Smith outside of round 1 ever. Right. So if it goes to that second set of 5 minutes or goes to the third round, right, I wouldn't favor him to win in those scenarios. So I think
absolutely.
Each guy's got some good equity.
Yeah. The third fight, this one didn't excite me too much. We got Kalinn Khaos Williams. I think is a very phenomenal fighter against Relando Bedoya. Bedoya making his UFC debut. 14-1 record, but like I'm not quite sure on his fight, like who he's really fought that's really been tested him. Whereas Khaos has had some good wins, and he does bring Khaos into the ring. He's a phenomenal athlete. And then there wasn't much to look at on Bedoya. And I say he's 36 years old, so that discrepancy in age too is interesting to me. Like there's that statistic of even if you don't watch the fights, like 67% or something to the guy who's 7 years younger. I think I swear I saw that flash up. Something about that age difference, being 36 versus 29.
It's wild that a 36-year-old is making the UFC debut. Typically they don't pick up these aged contenders. But he does come from a very respectable Latin American promotion, FFC. They're on Fight Pass. I think that they just inked a deal this year or the year before. And, he's appeared in their promotion 8 times and won 7 of those with 7 finishes in his career. Like he's good. But again, at 36, it's like, what? And look at the guys that Khaos Williams has lost to: Randy Brown, who is a savage at 170 pounds, Michel Pereira, who is currently ranked in the top 15. And then he didn't lose for the next what, 7 opponents, 5 years or so, or something like that. Like, he's got great wins. He's got amazing power.
Yeah.
I don't really see, like, again, there it is, minus 320. Khaos Williams should win this fight, and inside the distance is probably would be my play.
That would, yeah. So we look at his wins, kind of pretty balanced. But his losses, I look at his losses, he's only lost by decision. Both have only lost by decision. I don't think so do you think it's going to go to you don't think it's going to go to a decision?
No, I don't think so, because again, like, Relando's lost by decision, but he hasn't fought guys that are good enough to really finish him, in my opinion, right?
I think,
so,
I think that's valid.
You take that big step up in competition. A guy like Khaos Williams, who has just unbelievable KO power. Look, I mean, I know that the Abdul Razak Al Hassan fight was from 2020, so it's several years ago, but he just stone cold killed him. That guy was out. His fingers were just completely crunched. He was dead. So Khaos Williams inside the distance, minus 165. Still tough, but I think that would be my pick. But you've got an interesting one. Goes the distance.
I got to go in the distance. I think, like you said, with Bedoya, it comes from a respectable league. From what I saw, he's open to vulnerabilities of taking some big shots, but the guy has a chin. So from what I was watching, he does have a chin. So and he, again, never lost. Neither of them have lost by a, and specifically Bedoya has never lost by a knockout. But you bring up a good point that this might not be some power that he's ever seen before. So this one, I'm confident on the winner. I'm not confident on the method and the round or going the distance. Like, I think both could happen. I'm going to go off of what I watched and what I see until proven otherwise. But this wasn't a fight that like really excited me. This next one really excited me. Kennedy Nzechukwu and Devin Clark. Kennedy Nzechukwu was the strangest fighter to watch. Like, I watched all his fights from, I think, starting in 2019, whether he started in 2019 or 2020 when he made his debut in the UFC. But
March 2019 against the guy in Paul Craig, which is a tough fucking debut.
Yeah, and that was a weird fight. Like, Paul Craig, I think, got lucky by getting him early in his career, where Nzechukwu's developed quite a bit from what I've watched, where he is so good when he's the aggressor, but like, he's like, almost reminds me of like Joel Embiid with basketball, like his potential, how good he could be, because he's got this, I think he has the biggest reach in the light heavyweight division. Guy's 6'5". Most of his opponents are like 6'1". He trains, or he used to train with Jeff Neal, Ryan Spann, who is a common, Devin Clark fought Ryan Spann. Very different fighting styles. Spann's looking to take it to the ground and win by submission, but he's like another 6'5" guy. And if I remember right, he dropped Devin Clark and then submitted him. And those guys trained together. Kennedy and him trained together. So that's another like closest opponent matchup, but it was a few years ago, so that could be different. But Nzechukwu just weird, man. He have you watched his fights?
I distinctly remember the fight with Carlos Olberg, which was his third UFC performance. Olberg, highly touted, city kickboxing, prodigy. He's training with Israel Adesanya, Alexander Volkanovski. Everybody was on Carlos Olberg. And dude, Kennedy and Nzechukwu just fucking murdered him.
It's so, like when you see guys get dropped, like guys come in with a flurry of punches, this guy throws like one or two, and like he lets you throw like 40, and then he just throws like this hook and just drops people out of nowhere. And his cardio is surprisingly really good, where he can go the distance, because I think he'd be a better 5-round fighter, because it seems like he doesn't wake up till the third round a lot of the time.
He's just got such a slow pace, like you were talking about. He waits. He's much more accurate. I think that's what he leverages. And you look at a guy in Kennedy who has 8 KO wins because of all of those tools, and a guy in Devin Clark who's got 3 KO losses, 6 stoppage losses overall. So as much as I like Devin Clark, his fight against Iwan Kudalaba was one of the gutsiest performances I think I've seen inside the UFC. I mean, his mouth was destroyed, but he still pushed through, and in my opinion, won the later parts of that fight. So I know that he's got durability, but again, I'm like, I just don't in those losses, he loses bad, and I think a guy in Kennedy is going to be able to capitalize on Devin's
Well,
mistakes, and yeah, it's going to be a wrap for
well,
Devin.
Devin is a guy who comes out now. If you're like watching the fight as like a fighter, you would think
Mhm.
you would want to take up the styles that beat Nzechukwu. Like they have a common opponent in Da Un Jung, who the way he beat Kennedy was crazy. He came out with this, he matched Kennedy's energy, just like very slow, methodical, and then boom, cracked him with an elbow, like sliced through him with like a front elbow, and then that got to him, and he actually like dropped him, like slumped him bad. But the guy's record isn't that the guy who beat him's record wasn't that great. He's a very Kennedy's very confusing to me. Where I'm like, I want to be more confident in him, but I just don't know what Kennedy is going to show up. If it's the one who's been showing up, and I think this loss that he had, that's a split decision. That's not a real. I don't know if you remember that fight, but he landed like 3 groin strikes and lost. He lost 2 points during that fight and still got one of the judges, I believe, to pick him.
Right.
So that doesn't really apply.
Like that should be a win. Yeah, if he didn't make those dumb decisions, it should be a win.
Well, it washes because earlier in his career, I think he fought Stosic. I think that was his second. It might have been his second fight. And Stosic lost like 1 or 2 points on eye gouges, or maybe it was groin kicks. It was one of the two. But he was actually winning that fight, so it kind of washed it out. But if you're looking at that, that's not really accurate. And then he beat Kuzalaba, who beat Devin Clark, but this is I think back in 2020. But again, it's the styles make fights. I think to beat Kennedy, you got to do it the way that Da Un Jung did it. But Devin Clark is the guy who's, I think he's going to be swinging wild. And
Yeah, I don't think that Young's game plan could be replicated against Kennedy.
no, that was
Yeah, Devin Clark brings such a different approach, and it seems like he's stuck in his ways. You know what I mean? Like
mhm.
he's not evolving as a fighter, which isn't a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
he's been in the game for many years.
We had
It
15
makes
UFC
sense.
fights, 15 UFC.
Yeah.
And hasn't he gone from like UFC to like out of the UFC to back in the UFC, if I remember correctly?
Um, from what I'm seeing on Jourdain, because my topology is deciding not to work, he was in the UFC in 2016, and since then he's just been consistent with that promotion.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of betting this one, I don't know what the line is on fight does not go the distance or something like that, but I can definitely see someone getting finished.
I think Njuku's a guy you can take to the decision.
Mhm.
He's willing to go there, but recently, no. Recently, he's looked better and better each fight I've seen him. Like I said, never been submitted. Clark doesn't really look to do the submissions, but Kennedy's a pretty good wrestler, and like he can get taken down, but he doesn't. Nobody's really controlled him on the takedown. So my winner is Kennedy Nzechukwu KO TKO round 2. He starts slow, but he finishes fast with precision. I think he's going to let if it does get out of the first round, gets the second round. By that time, Devin Clark probably be tired, and that 8-inch reach advantage will show to be the deciding factor. Your
Love it.
thoughts?
Nah, I agree with that. I co-sign it. I think that Kennedy inside the distance is the play, especially by KO and picking the round. It makes it even juicier, baby.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This one, this is one that was an interesting one, also interesting for you. I didn't watch too much of this because I've seen Drew Dober in the past, and I was like, he's a really good fighter. And to me, on paper, if you look at their records and everything, much better record, much better pedigree. I mean, this Drew Dober's fought some really, really high level talent. He's beaten a lot of people. He's beaten a lot of prospects where it was like, I think, who was it? Daniel, was his last name? Or it's Alexander.
Alexander Hernandez in 2020. Yep.
That was like, those are like two guys that were like neck and neck. And then Drew Dober kind of proved he was the better man in that fight.
He's a guy whose record is so not indicative of, his fighting ability. He's 26-11 overall, but I mean, in the last since June of 2019, he's only lost twice, and it's to Brad Riddell, who is a really respected lightweight, and
Yeah.
Islam Makhachev, who's of course the current champion. And then
Right.
you look even before that, and it's Beneil Dariush, who's the number, I think,
Right.
4 or 5 contender, and Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who was the most recent PFL $1 million winner champion in the 155-pound division. So he only loses to the best. And like you said, he's taken out some legit contenders. Bobby Green, KOing Bobby Green is not something that a lot of people could do. KOing Rafael Alves is also a big, feather in the cap. Terrence McKinney, who, his entire ceiling, I think, is yet to be found. But in that fight, I mean, Terrence dropped him twice, and Dober proved he, can really leverage that durability, came back and finished him. Hernandez, Hack harassed. Polo Reyes, who beat Matt Frevola back in the day, Scott Holtzman in 2016. So like he just has a lot of really good, consistent wins. And Frevola is taking a big step up. Now, I've got, of course, my personal bias. Matt Frevola is a buddy of mine. Both him and Billy Quarantillo are two of the people in the UFC that I'm closest with. So I'm unbelievably biased coming into this. But this is a big step up. But I don't want to discredit what Frevola has done in the last, year or so. He's beaten Ottman Azatar, who was 13-0 at the time, and a lot of people believe that Ottman was going to blow through him. I mean, Azatar was heavily touted and just a huge knockout artist. Frevola was a plus 140 dog, KO'd him in round number 1. Before that, Genaro Valdez, 10-0, was a respected undefeated fighter. Frevola KO'd him in round number 1. And then you get to the Terrence McKinney fight, which I think is what really twisted a lot of people's perspectives on Matt Frevola. He got knocked out in 7 seconds. It was a perfect left cross. It caught Frevola coming in. He was off balance. That's just the nature of the game. And unfortunately, I think that did a lot of damage to his reputation as a fighter, and people undervalued him moving forward. But before that, he took
it's similar, right? Dober got dropped by McKinney too, but obviously
came back and finished Terrence. Yeah, that's the difference in that one. But before that, Frevola he took a short notice opportunity with Arman Saryukian, who is again a very respected lightweight. Took him to the scorecards. Beat Jalen Turner, who is now a ranked lightweight. Beat Haush Manfiel in 2017, who went on to win the PFL $1 million. So like Matt Frevola does have good wins. He's got really good finishing ability. And in my opinion, I think that this is the fight where Drew Dober finally gets cracked. I think that the Crimson Chin can fall. He has been finished 5 times in his career, one of those by KO, and I think that Matt Frevola is going to tack on a 2 to that KO loss.
Yeah. The only thing other than what was on paper and what I'd seen, big opportunity for Frevola to establish himself and kind of reestablish his reputation. Dober was in rumors to have a fight with Paddy Pimblett, which would be a huge payday if you're, that's what you want. And so I feel like this is a trap for him as a letdown, like go from a potential Paddy Pimblett fight, big money fight to where I think Paddy Pimblett's very beatable in my opinion. Kind of you're headlining the prelim. It's kind of I think a big letdown for Drew Dober. He hasn't really expressed that, but from what I've read, I can't imagine that, because I know with the fighters, most of these guys don't make as much money as people might think. So
I think, from my knowledge, I'd say the opposite. There's a lot of backroom deals and things, checks that get cuts backstage. But no, to your point, this should be the pay-per-view opener. Drew Dober and Matt Frevola really deserves to be on that UFC 288 pay-per-view. But here's the way that I've come to think of it and justify it and be okay with it. Because think about it this way. This is the last fight that the general public gets access to. This is the last fight that the casual audience gets to see for free and is the appetizer to the pay-per-view. This is what should sell them to buy that UFC 288 pay-per-view. So from that thinking, it's a really big opportunity and a huge platform. Like that's a spotlight. If you're on ESPN Plus and you're more accessible to people, that is a bigger platform than maybe the 288 pay-per-view in itself, right? Because who's going to actually convert and buy? So there is some merit in being that featured prelim. But I agree. I think that this did deserve that pay-per-view rub, especially guys in Drew Dober, who's had 19 fights in the UFC, Matt Frevola, who's had 8 fights in the UFC. Like, I don't get why Kron, Gracie, and what is it, Charles Jourdain is cracking up the pay-per-view. That doesn't sit right with me.
It's because of Gracie. I think. I think the one that maybe he's questionable is the one that's after that is the I think that one just got added like not too long ago.
Mosvar and Diego. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that one in specific. But for my pick, I got Dober KO first round. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but this one I'm not like crazy confident in, but I think he's my pick. He's the pick that you should pick, but I don't know. Not a big confident pick for me.
It's, I think that's as much as I love Frevola, Dober by KO is a good bet. He's finished so many people, and we've seen Matt Frevola lose twice by knockout. Again, the Terrence McKinney fight is like, ooh, the Polo Reyes fight, a minute in, he gets clipped. So he can get clipped and get finished. But
yeah,
I mean, I look at the value on Matt Frevola by KO, and it's a ridiculous line. I want to pull it up. And money line itself, I think he's money line like plus 175. So that's a great bet. But
he dropped quite a bit. Like these odds were not.
No, yeah, it was a lot wider.
Yeah.
But Frevola by KO plus 550. I'll take that.
Let it ride, baby. Kron Gracie, Charles Jourdain. This one is one I'm really excited for just because of Gracie. He's one of a kind, dude. Like he literally a zombie. Like, and I mean his first fight, and then he's so much to talk about with him and so little, but he's 5-1, only 2 fights in the UFC. I'm like, okay, ring rust, but he fought in 2016, took 3 years off, fought twice in 2019. Now he comes back. I don't know necessarily. That might actually benefit him with the ring rust. And then when they said he trains with the Diaz Academy, I was like, that makes sense. He fits in with their style. He has to submit you to win because he's not going to win on his feet. If anybody took notes and was going to fight this guy, do what Cub Swanson did. Run around, land big shots. The guy I don't know how he didn't get dropped against Cub Swanson. And then he started throwing dirty box, like he landed over 100 shots in that fight. So I'm like, I don't know. But I think the further you go with him, Gracie's used to getting out of the first rounds in all his wins, except for one, like was in the second round. But when he did get some opportunities to try and take it to the ground with Cub Swanson, they were so sweaty from the fight that he just slipped right off of him, and he couldn't really get a hold of him. And Cub Swanson's he's no slouch. This was back in 2019 though. He's a Hall of Famer, isn't he?
Cub Swanson. Mm-hmm. So Cubs fight with Doo Ho Choi was inducted to the Hall of Fame. So technically, yeah.
Okay. Well, and he's just like Cubs. He reminds me of another like Donald Cerrone in the fact he's been around forever.
Yeah,
has
WBC,
a lot of wins. Gracie, I think that was a step up, like a smart fighter who's been in the game, like going to put a good game plan together. Charles Jourdain does not impress me a whole lot. For like Kron Gracie fought another impressive opponent, Alex Caceres, who beat a lot. He beat a lot of these people in the same division that have beaten Jourdain, and Kron Gracie made short work of him. I think Caceres tried to throw one leg kick and he grabbed his leg, boom. Next thing you know, it was a rear naked choke early. And that's really all I can go off of with Kron Gracie. If you can run around for 15 minutes and not take it to the ground with him, you'll win. I don't have much to say on Jourdain.
That's interesting. I really like Jourdain. I think that this is a fight where, he has some high potential to lose. Jourdain's a guy who takes big risks, hence the nickname Air Jourdain. And a guy in Gracie, like you said, capitalizes on one mistake. All he needs is one opening to get to your back or take you to the mat and sub you. And Jourdain has been submitted once. But I really think that, you talk a lot about distance management and keeping the range and just firing shots on the feet from a ways away. Charles Jourdain can do that. He has displayed an ability to do that. And I want to highlight one thing about the Cub Swanson fight, which I think Jourdain can really take away from, is the body work. Cub Swanson landed 40 of 58 body shots. Kron Gracie only landed 4. Mm-hmm. So if Charles Jourdain can invest in the midsection and while keeping that range, but still butter up the body. It's going to take away from the cardio. It's going to take away from Kron's ability to explode into those grappling scenarios
Sure.
to get it to the mat, or even if it does, finish it. Right? You said once that sweat gets going, baby, it gets so much harder to
Yeah.
to lock in a sub.
Yeah.
And Charles Jourdain, his fight with Shane.
And right. All right. So yeah, Zoom. I pay for Zoom and I don't even get the plus 40. I only get 40 minutes. So um
I'll
as we
wrap up. Yeah. My last thoughts on this one, I feel like Charles Jourdain's just a much more sophisticated striker. Kron Gracie is 34. He's inactive as hell.
yeah.
And I just don't think that he's got the tools on the feet to allow himself to get into the ground. Now, that's not saying that Charles Jourdain can't make a mistake and Kron can capitalize. I just don't think that Kron Gracie can create those situations on his own volition.
Yeah.
Air Jordan needs to make a mistake. And I think in this fight, he recognizes that, okay, I need a win. You know what I mean? I have lost my last two, and the last one against Nathaniel Wood was not a great performance. So I think Charles Jourdain's going to bounce back against a much older, much less experienced opponent.
Yeah. I think, yeah, Kron Gracie, you don't know what we're gonna expect from him. Because we never seen him go the distance. And then he did what he did with Cub Swanson. I'm like, that's the game plan against that guy. Because I don't know how much his style is going to change. He's there for one thing and one thing only. So I still went with him though. For my pick, I have him submission round 1. Amazing chin. Don't see him getting knocked out. He will continue putting pressure and eating shots until he finds his end to try and land rear naked choke. And he's used to ring rust, where I'm looking. That's always a red flag to me when you've been out that long. But he's done it before and come back. He is 34, but that might also work to his advantage. Not having that many fights. I don't know. Because he's going to eat shots. It's not like he's in there playing a lot of defense. But I don't think he's taken a lot of shots throughout his career just because he saved them up. And Kron's a tough motherfucker, dude. He's always very straight-faced, very no emotion coming from him. The whole time he looked like a zombie, bro. I was like, he's a perfect Nate Diaz. Diaz
archetype. Yeah, I mean, he fits in that 209 crew, but
yeah.
I mean, again, those guys are just punching bags, and I think that's what Kron Gracie is going to be tonight.
Sure, but those punching bags sometimes win. Like Diaz lost to a lot of people, but he also beat who he was supposed to beat, I think, in a lot of the cases. So I don't know. That one's exciting to me though. I'm excited to see it. I'm gonna go with Kron. Won't be surprised if I was fighting against him, I would just take the same game plan that Cub Swanson had. But we'll see tonight. Next fight, dude. This one, Not much to really. I mean, Mosvar's supposedly a huge prospect. He's a minus 1,000 favorite.
Mm.
Last I checked on the FanDuel, um, undefeated. All his fights have, for the most part, as of recently, been by decision, which would statistically be what he'd go to next. Diego Lopes, he's making his debut. They're about the same age. This guy, he's a finisher though. I think he finishes most of his fights. He has a lot of professional fights, but how valid are those fights? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah. So here's the thing about Mobzar. He has 7 finishes in his career, but all of those came before his UFC tenure. Since his debut in April of 2019, he's just been decisioning guys. He's just been taking people to the scorecards, working methodically,
Yep.
and getting the numbers, which is fine. I mean, I people are really heavily touting him, and I think that they should. He doesn't have many weaknesses, but God damn, is he boring. I'm really not a fan of
Boring.
his fighting style. I don't enjoy watching him fight. So I'd love to see Diego come in and play spoiler. Like you said, he's got 19 finishes in 20 victories. That's a pretty good stat. The
Yeah.
flip side of it is against who? You got to remember he lost his contender series fight against Joe Anderson Brito in August of 2021.
Yep.
So it's like he hasn't passed that test.
No.
So I think that
And then he's
yeah.
got this. Goes from that to, and I don't even know. This fight got added late, did it not?
This is like literally on several days' notice. Diego Lopes he was here as like a striking coach for somebody. Mosvar's opponent fell out, and Diego stepped in, which is I think good for him. I think it builds some goodwill, and he'll definitely get another shot in the UFC with a loss here, which is obviously what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no real, in my opinion, ways to win against a guy like Mosvar on zero notice. It just
Right.
doesn't. It's a
Yeah.
recipe for failure.
Yeah. He's almost like a Floyd Mayweather of MMA with how he wins. And most of these guys aren't undefeated, so you can go off of their losses and see what's gone wrong and what matchups don't go well for them. Now he has had a couple split decisions, which means he's lost a third of the decision, but I don't know. I don't see Diego Lopes winning the fight. However, when it comes to betting purposes, one thing that was interesting is if you go on UFC's website, I don't know if they've updated it. I could probably check right now. Or you could to verify what I'm saying. It said that the odds for Diego Lopes were only like minus, I want to say like minus 230, minus 220, or sorry, plus 220. And I was like, that's got to be a typo because none of the books have that unless because I think they get their feed from DraftKings on the UFC.com website. When you click on like the main event, it drops down all the fighters and shows the odds. Are you looking it
Yeah,
up?
so I'm looking at Best Fight Odds, which has BetMGM, Caesars, BetRivers, FanDuel. Diego Lopes is plus 600 at best, plus 660 here, plus 850 there. On Betway, he is plus 500.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, across the board, he's a really, really heavy
Yeah.
underdog.
Yep. So if you wanted to do like a 2-leg parlay with him and literally anybody else, or like a small underdog, like him and Belal Muhammad, could be very profitable.
Uh, in theory,
In
right?
theory.
When you do the math, but this is a guaranteed loss. I don't think that anybody should bet on Diego Lopes because he's got no notice. This is a guy who has no fighting camp against the person in Mosvar Evloev who's been training for the last 8 to 12 weeks for war. Diego's coming in. He's going to look probably out of shape, no cardio. He's going to swing for the fences. And like we said, a guy in Mosvar has no real weaknesses at present. So
Yeah.
I don't see a massive upset occurring. That'd be great. That would be a huge moment, and a guy in Diego who's put in such great work over the last how many years of his career could deserve that big opportunity, but he's going to lose.
Yeah. If I was betting the straight bet and not trying to make a profitable parlay, definitely going to go with Mosvar Evloev. I would not put him in my parlay because there's no real reward for putting this one on there with a minus 1,000.
No juice. Yeah.
No, it would be like one of the biggest upsets in UFC history.
If I will say this, man, if you take this right here, Mobs are by decision plus 120, right? So you do get some some plus odds
Yeah.
on Mosvar if you choose for him to go to the scorecards, which is not a bad bet. That is actually a really good call. I would say the best bet of the card so far that we found, because at a minus 1,000 favorite, to find some way to squeeze juice out of it, that's irregular. So I'd
Yeah.
say this is a really good play here.
Sure. Yeah. And then you could hedge it with a Lopes upset.
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, yeah, Lopes, you pick Diego Lopes inside the distance, it's plus 800. So you put $3 on that,
Mm-hmm.
$24, that's worth it.
Yep. But yeah, if we were picking straight up, I'm going with this guy, Mosvar. But yeah, I'm not excited for this fight. Um, the and this is the last one we're talking about. We're not talking about the main event. We can talk about it, but I didn't do any analysis on it. I stay away from the main event just because that's where all the hype's at, and the lines are going to be obviously a little skewed for a main event because everyone's going to be picking that one. And that's when like FanDuel will promote like all their betting props on. You can do other betting props on all the fights, but that's where all the promotions and all the stuff is coming from. So the common man is going to be looking at that. So I don't look at the main fights. This is the last one. So this is basically the main event for me watching the fights. Belal Muhammad, Gilbert Burns, very interesting matchup. I remember when you were on the podcast, you had nothing but great things to say about Belal Muhammad. You think he deserves the next shot? He's a remember the name. Is that his name?
That's
Belal,
the
remember the
nickname.
name?
Yep.
But yeah, really, really solid technical fighter, man. He's earlier in his career known as being a striker, but his wrestling game has improved quite a bit over the years. He just doesn't really have many holes in his game, other than his lack of self-promotion.
Yeah, I think that when you think about Belal Muhammad, he's on a 9-fight unbeaten streak with just some really good names. I mean, 3 top 10 opponents in there. Stephen Thompson, who's obviously still in the top 10. Vicente Luque, who KO'd him back in the day. He just dominated him for the full 25 minutes. Oh gosh. The only it wasn't even a setback, was no contest, was to Leon Edwards, who's the current champion. And a lot of people like to take stuff away from that fight. I don't think you can take much. We got 18 seconds into round 2 before that was stopped, right? There's not much to take away. And then beating Sean Brady, TKOing him, an undefeated 15-0, 16-0 guy who people were considering the dark horse of the division. Belal Muhammad goes in there and stops the hype. Now, here's where things get a bit tricky, is Gilbert Burns is taking this on very short notice. He just beat Jorge Masvidal in April of last year, so about a month removed from that fight. We don't know exactly how his camp looked like for this. He only had like 2 weeks, I think. So I don't know. Can see.
And he's not 26. I don't know why. He's 36. He's not 26.
Yeah, older guy. And here's the thing with Gilbert is the durability's always been weird. He's got some suspect durability. Khamzat Chimaev dropped him with the jab. Kamaru Usman dropped him multiple times with the jab. I believe Stephen Thompson had some success despite being grounded for the majority of that fight. So I don't. And a win over Jorge Masvidal at the current moment of 2023 doesn't mean much to me. I don't really factor that in. That was a fight, cool, great name on the resume, but the guy has not done anything in years and doesn't really deserve to be considered as he beat Masvidal. Like, that doesn't matter to me. So I think that Belal Muhammad, given how he's had a fight camp for this, given all the momentum, given how this is a 5-rounder. Now that's where things get tricky. This is a 5-round fight. Belal Muhammad, it's tough. He's a tough guy to finish. I don't think Gilbert Burns is going to be able to do that. So you extend to the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th. I think Belal Muhammad by TKO in rounds 4 or 5, there is some real potential. And it's insane odds. I mean, you look at the numbers on it. Belal Muhammad to win by KO in round 4, plus 3,500. Belal Muhammad by KO in round 5, plus 4,000. Those are ridiculous. Like, I would put a sprinkle on him. But Gilbert Burns inside the distance also wouldn't shock me. He's a dog.
Yeah. Well, Gilbert Burns is the submission guy for the most part. Never been submitted. Belal's never been submitted. That has to say something. That's what went into my factoring of the decision on who I was going to go with. And then 16 by decision, so we know he can grind it out. Like that's usually his MO. But I mean, he will pick and choose his opportunity. Just a very sound technical fighter. I mean, if you're really into fighting and you really enjoy it, he's entertaining. It's like watching the Spurs play basketball back in the day, but boring to the common person, I would say. Gilbert Burns, he's a mixed bag. And no knock on Gilbert Burns. There's a reason he's the favorite, but
it's a tight favorite. I mean, this is really a coin flip. Yeah.
Yeah. I went with Belal Muhammad decision going the distance. He said that 7-year age difference. And he is the up and coming fighter to really I think he's done quite a bit to establish himself. I think you'd agree with that. And he's also improved upon his wrestling, which
you talk about the grappling pedigree, right? Which he displayed against guys like Stephen Thompson, guys like Luque. But then you think about the kickboxing improvements as well, which he showed against Sean Brady. I mean, that striking looked really good, chaining combinations together. Really just figuring out how to integrate the uppercuts and the hooks and the overhands. Like he's in a new gear. I mean, this is a new version of Belal Muhammad. And I think it's about time that people, the general audience, put some serious respect on his name. And yeah, I just Gilbert Burns is an animal for taking this fight. I have all the respect in the world to him for accepting this. I respected him a ton before the decision to step in here on short notice, but Belal Muhammad's not a guy that you take on short notice. That's just period, end of story. And so I agree with that. I take Belal.
Yeah, if you're if you're in the agent game of helping get your fighters signed for fights, your goal is to either one, not lose, because a couple losses changes everything in this sport, or B, if there is a good chance you're going to lose, then there's going to be a substantial payday that comes with it. Gilbert Burns does not give a shit. He will fight anyone, but it's kind of that maybe more not a like more of an ego decision than anything. And I think he's more of the I mean, he has confidence in himself. That's great.
Well, this is also when you think about opponents in the welterweight division, Belal is a top 5 guy. 9-fight unbeaten streak. You beat Belal, you are now locked in at the next crack. In my opinion, this is the deciding fight between who should fight Leon Edwards next. Fuck Colby Covington. That fight should not occur. This is the deciding fight, in my opinion. So each guy's got a lot to gain here. And a guy in Gilbert, I mean, he's getting paid as well. I know that doesn't factor into the decision making, but they are giving him a bag to come in here and fight a guy like Belal. And even with a loss, it's a top 5 guy. 9-fight unbeaten streak. Like there's really no stock loss for Gilbert Burns unless he gets like flatlined and put out in some insane way,
or some sort of injury that is tough to come back from. But he's 36 years old. He does need to take one of these fights. Risky for him, but if he does win, it's going to pay off and should land him a title fight with Leon Edwards. I'd like to see Colby Covington personally, just because he makes me laugh. But we're talking about deserving winner of this fight. I think very deserving. I think hats off to Burns for fighting 3 times before the year's even halfway over. Ridiculous. So again, don't have a pick for didn't do analysis on any of the main fight between Cejudo and Dillashaw, but probably what the common person wants to know. Give me your thoughts on that fight. Who do you got? How are they going to do it?
No, I think that again, I'm biased in this one. I work for Henry, and so my opinion on how this fight's going to go is a little bit skewed, but at present, the line is -120 Henry, +100 to the current champion, Aljamian Sterling. Now, Henry is coming off of a layoff. I think that is important to recognize. But before that, he looked fantastic. I mean, beating a really excellent version of Marlon Moraes, beating TJ Dillashaw, who admittedly was dehydrated down at 125, but then KOing Dominic Cruz in 2020. Now, that version of Dominic Cruz had only lost to Cody Garbrandt. So he was coming off of a 4-year layoff directly into a title shot, and Cruz or Cejudo put him out with a knee. Now then Cruz went on to beat Casey Kenny decisively, Pedro Munoz decisively, and was competitive with Marlon Vera until round 4 where he was head kicked. Dominic Cruz is still a force to be reckoned with. He's still a top 10 bantamweight, in my opinion, now.
Yeah.
Cejudo killed him 3 years ago. So
Cejudo, I have no reason. It's tough because they're like two different generations. Like once Cejudo left, we're kind of waiting, and we all thought it was Jan for a little bit. And
yeah,
that first loss he had against Sterling, Aljamian was, I was like, he was getting his ass beat. If they fight again, like my lock is Piotr Jan. And Sterling came out, made the adjustments, and like dominated him, dude. I was like, huh. I was thoroughly impressed.
It was a really good performance by Aljamain and Sterling. You know, I think that rematch with Jan showed a lot of people what he could do. And again, I'm not disrespecting Aljo. You know, I think that he's a phenomenal fighter. He's
absolutely
hasn't been beaten since 2018, and he's put some really good names on his resume. Submitting Corey Sandhagen in 90 seconds was ridiculous, and it's aged so well. But fighting TJ Dillashaw, whose arm was completely injured, right? There's an asterisk. The first Piotr Jan fight, again, he was losing pretty bad. And in my opinion, you know, should have lost that one, but Jan made a dumb decision. So I think coming into this, Cejudo is taking on a really beatable champion in Aljamain Sterling. And you look at stylistically how this matches up. Aljo's wrestling, his grappling is not going to be a factor. Cejudo's an Olympian. Olympic gold medalist. There's no way.
Like, just when I remember watching Cejudo when he was fighting and active, dude was I can't pick against him.
You can't.
I will not pick against him again.
He's got some of the highest fight IQ in the game. The way that he prepares for opponents is just unmatched. I mean, that's why you see so many fighters do their camps at Fight Ready with Cejudo. John Jones trained with him to beat Cyril Gane. Davison Figueiredo trained to try and beat Brandon Moreno. Zhang Wei Li came in and trained at Fight Ready. And many other examples, Paulo Costa. Like, there are so many respected UFC fighters that really put Cejudo's mind on a pedestal. And my girlfriend's corgi is making some noises. And that shows where, you know, I think that you should bet is with Cejudo. His power is going to be there. He's really worked on the hands. I don't see Aljamain taking him down. So Henry Cejudo by KO, I think, is like plus 300. That's where I would bet.
Yeah, I think so. I could see it going to like a ground and pound situation to finish the fight.
Yeah, exactly.
So there we have it. There are the picks. There's the weigh-ins. Nobody's ever perfect with this. I say, and when I say trust your gut, it's like, well, sometimes your gut's wrong, bro.
Yeah. No, that's again why I think about Matt Frevola. You know, that fight, of course, I'm trusting my gut, my heart, everything. I want him to win.
Yeah.
You know, and so there are fights on here where I'm like, don't listen to me. But there's a couple where I'm like, yeah, I'd say listen to me.
Right. Yeah. I think if I was to, let me see what kind of bets I put in here. I put in a handful of parlays, some on straight winners, and I did it on FanDuel. Just because that's the one I have access to. But down the line, look for the best lines or best places, or some of those apps like Cesar Sportsbook is offering a 33% profit boost for making a 4-leg or more parlay. So if you chose 3 lock favorites and maybe one semi underdog, and then put that on there, it's getting a 33% profit boost.
Speaking of boost, DraftKings currently offering a nice odds boost on the main event. So I picked Henry Cejudo by KO at plus 330. They boosted that to plus 430. 4-pick parlay, that was plus 2,500. Now it's plus 3,200 with a DraftKings 25% parlay boost. So I would say, dude, if you're like trying to bet, that's where you should start off, is putting a little bit in each book to get those promotions and those boosts, because that's invaluable.
Yeah, and if you have a promo code, make sure you send it to me. I'll put it in the description of this, as well as the FanDuels and the Cesar Sportsbook. All those, we'll put those down in the comments, or in the description of the video.